So good morning to the Americas, good evening to Africa, Europe and the Middle East, and good night to Asia, India and Australia. It is my honor, and I must confess also a pleasure, to welcome you all to this peculiar ceremony. We gather today to celebrate the authors of the most remarkable essays on ethics and trust in finance for a sustainable future for the years 2020 and 2021. I introduce myself. I'm Paul Dembinski, director of the Geneva-based Observatoire de la Finance, and also the co-president of the jury of the prize. This 8th edition of the prize started online in spring 2020, and unfortunately is also closing online for obvious reasons, despite what we hoped earlier. The good news is that the event allows the attendance from all sides of the world. We are about 100 by now and probably growing in the next few minutes. But there is a bad side of it. The bad side is that we will have only virtual champagne at the end of the ceremony. So which is sad, and we would hope to correct it in the next editions. Anyhow, we are happy and proud to have completed successfully this 8th edition. Behind this organizational success, there are 4 strands of goodwill, and would like to thank and to address these 4 strands of goodwill heartfully. First, we have the partners. You see them logos behind myself. There is their support was absolutely fundamental. CFA Institutes, CFA Institute, Euroclear, Pictet Foundation, SWIFT and SWIFT Institute, Association of Chartered and Certified Accountants, OECD. This is for the main partners, strategic partners. But I would like also to thank heartfully the partners that were running the national and the linguistic editions. First, the Polish Banking Association that is running the Polish edition, the École Supérieure de la Banque that is running the French-speaking edition, and Welt Ethos Institute that is running the German-speaking edition. All of them are very important for the success of our gathering and our competition. The second strand of goodwill is the committed team made up of Virgile Perret, Anna Soisson, and Nati Garcia, all based at the Observatoire. The third is the goodwill of the jury members. You are about 25 jury members coming from different disciplines, different fields of activity, and all of you give your time and energy and knowledge to run through the expertise of the papers we received. Thank you very much. And the final strand of goodwill is the enthusiasm of the young authors who responded to our invitation and decided to share their views, to structure their views, to share their views with us, with the jury, by submitting the papers. Some of them will come to the fore later during the ceremony, but it's nevertheless the moment to thank all of them for their effort, for the commitment, and for the concern about the main theme of the prize, which is ethics and trust in finance for a sustainable future. Many of you are aware that the starting point of the prize is the concern of bringing finance closer to and to better align with the concerns of the common good. All this started about 20 years ago in a conversation between Robin Cosgrove as his mother, and then unfortunately Robin died. He was a young banker and he died in an accident in the mountains. And the mother, Carol Cosgrove, many of you have met her, has started with me this prize with the Observatoire, this prize in 2005. So we are very happy to be today at the 8th edition, which is culminating in this ceremony. The challenges in front of finance, but also in front of ethics, are even higher when we are in times troubled times as like the ones we live in, of what can we call of systemic transformation. We are a few days after COP26, which brought the subject of sustainability to the fore. Of course, there is a question, and the roundtable just after my introduction will address this, the relationship between ethics and sustainability. But before this, I will just introduce the structure of the event. We'll have three moments. One, the first one, the roundtable that is coming up now, which will be moderated by Mrs. Josina Kamerling. She is the co-president of the jury of the prize. She is head of outreach of CFA Institute, and she's based in Brussels. It is a person that is very strongly committed to the question of ethical standards of financial profession, being herself a former banker. Then we'll turn to the Commissioner, Mrs. Mairead McGuinness, for the Keynote Address. And then the third moment of the ceremony will be the moment where we welcome the winners, we discover the winners, we listen to their short speeches, and the fourth moment of the ceremony, which is informal for those who have been invited previously, will be a moment of exchange with the winners, the jury, the partners, and the guest speakers. So I stop here and I hand over to Josina. Thank you very much, Josina, and I leave you to introduce your panel members.
Thank you so much, Paul. And it's such a pleasure to be here again. I cannot tell you what a joy it is to read the essays, to debate with the jury, and to engage with stakeholders at large on the topics of these essays. The young people that have written these essays have inspired me and many others. And of course, in my panel, there is such a young person who was a laureate of, I think, Lehre, the very first prize. But let me introduce the panelists by alphabetic order. Let's be completely correct in this. So first of all, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jean-Philippe Desmartins, who is the head of responsible investment at Edmond de Rothschild Asset Management since 2016. And he's, of course, the member of several working groups and international committees looking to further ESG issues. Jean-Philippe is also chairing the research commission at the French Forum pour l'Investissement Responsable. So really, it's wonderful to have an industry person with us today.
Hello.
Next, Hakan Lucius. Professor Dr. Hakan Lucius is head of corporate sustainability at the EIB, the European Union's bank, covering the sustainability, non-financial reporting, and stakeholder engagement dimensions of the institution. He's also professor of finance in parallel to his professional career and specializes in sustainable corporate finance and strategy. He's passionate about sustainability. I love that word, passionate, and is quoted to state that sustainability is at the heart of long-term outperformance. And I'm sure we'll hear quite a lot about that. Next, let me introduce you one of the first laureates of this Ethics in Finance Prize, Lehre San Jose, a PhD, who is Associate Professor of Finance Management at the University in Bilbao. Lehre is also visiting research fellow at Huddersfield Business School, working with Professor Chris Cowton, and she's a leader of the ECRI Ethics in Finance and Social Value Research Group. Her research is focused on ethics in finance and ethics in payment to suppliers, ESG, value creation, social accounting from a sustainable view, and based on stakeholders. So it's lovely to have you here. Cara, next, Cara Tambala. I have been so inspired by you in some of our discussions. She is the president and founder of the 7 Pillars Institute for Global Finance and Ethics based in the USA, the world's only independent think tank for research, education, and the promotion of financial ethics. She has nearly 30 years experience in global finance and was a senior portfolio manager Merrill Lynch of the Merrill Lynch Dragon Fund. She's been a sell-side equity analyst, sell-side equity sales, buy-side equity analyst, portfolio manager, and a lecturer in finance. So you've really done all the different stages of finance. And I think combining that with this think tank gives you a very particular specific. Now, before we go into our discussion with the panelists, let me just say that at CFA Institute, we've done quite a lot of research in the sort of future of finance series, where we look at the future of sustainability in investment management. There we really saw the interconnectedness of the financial system and how corporate value creation both affects and is affected by the ecosystem in which it operates. So integration of sustainability issues is going to require a much more widespread application of system level thinking. And that is one of the problems with it. When we looked at climate change analysis in the investment process, we also saw that there is a necessity for investors to engage, to really discuss the particularity, climate data, scenario analysis, but really to make sure that all these points are represented in the annual reports, that financial reporting reflects it accurately, non-financial reporting. So this discussion and communication between investors, stakeholders, and companies is at the heart of the change that is needed, and we'll be discussing some of that. But we need to educate our profession. The investment management profession needs to educate itself about how to account for it and how to put it within the process. Again, another issue that is really important nowadays is that the investor trust has been lacking since the financial crisis of 2008, even before then, and it's still not really come back. It's significant in some of our trust surveys that we've done globally that institutional investors are significantly more trusting than retail investors. And yet in Europe, with our Capital Markets Union project, we try to build in retail investor interest. And ethics is an important point. We've all seen in the newspapers issues of greenwashing. So is the industry using sustainability reporting and is it to hide certain issues? Again, trust is going to be a very important factor in all of this. But before we launch into the heat of the discussion, Hakan has a slide which is really going to surprise and make us think before we get into the heat of the moment. Hakan, do you think you can share your slide and comment it for a couple of minutes?
Thank you very much, Josina. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, and to Paul and the whole team. It's a pleasure to be here, and you jumped in right with a slide. I'll do my best to share it. The idea was to have that on your side, but that's not a challenge from my point of view. Let's give it a try. Let's see what technology will allow us to do. Basically, it's about sustainability, and the biggest challenge in sustainability we have is climate, and climate is about fossil fuels. So this is really a simple chart about that. Josina, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So if we look at simply this chart, and can you see it?
Yes.
Probably not. Yes. So you have two columns there. The left column shows all the oil, gas, and coal reserves which are currently known on this planet, which are on the balance sheets of all those companies around the globe. All oil, all gas, all coal. And if we burn all what we know, we will have something like 4,000 gigatons of CO2 emitted. That's the left column. And the right column shows us our 2 degrees budget. Meaning, if we want to stay at 2 degrees, this is what we said in Paris, 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 degrees, we only have 1,000 gigatons, which we can put into the atmosphere. It's about as simple as that, if we really take it down to the bones. Of the 2 degrees budget, we already have used more than half, right? The world is already warming and has warmed by more than 1 degree, by 1.2 roughly, compared to pre-industrial times. And my question here really is, to the audience, take a deep breath, be honest to yourself, think about it, and say, do you believe that we will stay below 2 degrees, or will we not stay below 2 degrees? If you ask yourself that question, and if you have done so, and came to an answer on your side, then if you have said we will stay below 2 degrees, congratulations, you're amongst the few optimists. Mm-hmm. If you have said we will not stay below 2 degrees, then you are amongst the big majority of those who have responded to my question, no matter where, no matter what audience, no matter what age, no matter what geography. Because people, from my experience, do not believe that we're going to stay below 2 degrees. Trust, ethics, sustainability for the future. What does that mean? What does that mean for our future, for our planet, for our children? And that really puts the whole big question center place and begs all the points which we are discussing in this fantastic conference and in the prize you're giving: trust, ethics, sustainability. It really is, to my knowledge, one way of exemplifying where we stand and where we are going to. So that really is the big thought, Josina. That really is the point I would suggest to start with and have that in our mind when we are discussing.
Thank you very much, Hakan. And a graph is very visual, and I think it brings it right. You know, some of the
Josina, I can't hear you.
Some of the feedback. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I can't hear you, Josina.
Yeah, I think Kara can hear me. Can you all hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Hakan, so thank you very much for that. I think it highlights clearly some of the feedback that came around COP26. And it is important to see, so sustainability in finance, is it necessary to have an ethical component? Is ethics integral to this sustainability or not? And I think that is a really good place to start before we dig in. I'm going to start with Mairead as one of the first laureates. So Mairead, I'm going to ask all of my panelists the same question, which I'm not going to do in the following question. So here you can all come in, but try not to take too many minutes because we have so much to discuss. Mairead.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to come here. I don't feel that young for the moment, because many years ago I won the Robin Cosgrove of Ethics in Finance prize. So because of that, you more or less, you could calculate my age. And thank you so much to continue to keep on to young people, to encourage them to try to contribute to ethics in finance. I think that nowadays we are a great opportunity to integrate ethics in finance, because before we were trying to think about the maximize of the benefits, and nowadays we are happy that we have changed that mind. About the question that you have made to me, I think that it is quite important to make a difference, and we have been speaking a little bit about it before. So because of that, my idea is that from ethical point of view, we need to introduce what is the question that it is why you are doing, what are the reasons that you are trying to develop some actions that they are aligned to social or environmental or governance. So because of that, it is quite important not only to get the performance, the results that we are trying to get all of those ones, but also how it is the process to decide which ones, in which level, in which form we are trying to get. So the purpose of doing the ethics, it is quite important from my point of view. And just a little comment to finish my first intervention. It is about the Hakan that have introduced that idea. And it is just that I am a bit worried, because normally when you are young, you are feeling the present. You are not that, you are not worried about the future. So that's when it is quite important, because when people is getting older, in that moment, you are trying to think about the future. So because of that, I think that we have a higher responsibility the people that we are not that young, that we need to encourage young people to think on their future and the future of their children as well. So I think that's one, it is quite important, the balance between what you are going to get in that moment today, what affects to me today, it is not that important. The 2 degrees are not coming just today, but in the future, I'm not going to be here. I'm thinking only on the present. So because of that, we need to change. That's mine. So that's it for the first presentation. First question will be fine.
Thank you, Leire.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to Jean-Philippe. Sustainability in finance, do we need ethics?
So thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And yes, we need ethics, of course, and ethics is still very present and not redundant because of sustainability for 3 main reasons. The first one is a question of calendar. I remind you that the concept of sustainability was formalized in 1987, something like 35 years ago. Breton Report under the umbrella of the United Nations, but decades before we had business ethics courses in university and business schools, and 300 years ago we had Quakers who decided not to invest in slavery, just to give example. So that's the first reason or reason of time. The second is perimeter, because when you think about sustainability, that's ES and G factors, environmental, social, and governance factors. And of course, naturally, that's our case. In the governance, you put business ethics, but also corporate governance, sustainability strategy. But some investors or other stakeholders sometimes do some focus on environment, for instance, and perhaps forget a little bit governance / ethics. So that's an important point to raise. And then there is a debate, which is a huge debate, but think that sustainability was developed with a universal message, United Nations, trying to capture a common message and understanding. The fact is that when you think about ethics, you also have local understanding, local differences, regulations. It can be cultural inputs or even religious ones. So I stop there, but clearly my answer is no, and clearly ethics is at the front.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. I'm going to turn to Cara, because of course you have a long experience in industry, and you have founded the only think tank really that is the 7 pillars. And I think what is important is to see also, Cara, we have the Edelman Institute, which does a yearly trust survey. This year, this trust survey highlighted the fact that people are trusting companies more than they're trusting governments. And I think that there has been a slow change. People used to trust government more. They used to engage for them. But now this is really changing. And that, of course, places responsibility on the company. Again, you know, where does that ethical component come into this? Is it wrong to place so much responsibility on the company? Is that their role? Do they have this ethical role? What is the role of investors? Do they have an ethical fiduciary duty in this? Cara.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack, Justina. But first, I'd like to answer Hakan's survey, which is that about where I stand is that I do believe that we are going to go above 2 degrees Celsius. So I'm with the majority. But just because I believe that does not mean that we have to give up and crawl into our caves. I want to say right now that as we speak, solar panels are being put up on my roof. So I'm doing my little part, and then I'm getting heat pumps and things like that. So we can only do what we can do, what we are capable of, but perhaps with the sustained effort by the whole world, because this is a global problem, that we might actually see some achievement. I don't know. I have been wrong before. So in terms of the first question, which was, is ethics redundant in the sustainability movement? Of course, I agree with the first 2 panelists who say no. I believe the only thing which makes ethics redundant is ethics. Of course, there is there is some overlap between sustainability and ethics. For instance, the goal of sustainability is to do good and to avoid harm. That itself is an ethical goal. However, how you reach that goal is another matter. You could reach it in an unethical manner, or you could just say, yes, I am into sustainability, but that's just a greenwashing kind of thing. So we'll always have to be vigilant on how people achieve sustainability if they're serious about sustainability. And we always have to keep them, corporations and governments, make sure that they're sticking to what they say to be their goals. Now, in terms of the Edelman survey, it is quite surprising to me that people do trust corporations more than governments. I would say that I probably would be in the minority there, since I've worked in corporations, I suppose. But I think that the responsibility, if that's your question, your responsibility on who is responsible for making sure that the efforts towards sustainability, ESG are met, is both a top-down and bottom-up. So we need people on all levels, because once again, this is a global problem which requires everyone to participate in the solution. So we need the bottom up, which is the investors, the shareholders, all the stakeholders to be invested in the goal of sustainability and reducing carbon. We need top down, which is the governments to make regulations and to direct how people act. And we need corporations, because obviously they need to buy in, and they have to somewhat demote the profit maximization goal and instead have a stakeholder kind of purpose, which is planet, people, and other stakeholders in the corporation, in order to meet all the goals that we want and to be below 2 degrees Celsius, as Hakan is saying is necessary.
Thank you, Kara. An ambitious program, and very, very difficult one ahead of us, I think. When we prepared this panel, Hakan, you quoted Henry Ford at me, and I would love you to bring back this quote, you know, on what is the actual purpose of a company, because we are placing quite a lot of action needed by the companies. And I think it will be interesting when we look at sort of the ethical and how it's redundant or not within sustainability. We can weave our way and see what that purpose of a company might be.
Thank you, Jessina. In fact, that's so true. And I quoted Henry Ford simply because it's a name well known, and it's a name which is old. I mean, he was living a century ago. And that brings me also to what Jean-Philippe said, you know, sustainability has its roots. Yes, it was 34 years ago that we defined it as a UN report, but as a business approach, it goes much deeper. It's about your stakeholder approach. And what he said was, he said, no company will survive without making a profit. So yes, you have to make money, clearly. And then he continued, no company will survive only making a profit. And that second part speaks volumes. It really says about how you make your profit. What are your values? How do you include your employees? You know, he famously increased the pay of his workers for them to be able to buy the T model that they were producing. It's about how do you deal with your suppliers. He basically was having, for example, packaging of the supply chain such that they were part of the production process, reducing waste 100 years ago. It's about thinking systemically. And in fact, it's surprising to see that 100 years ago, when building the cars, he actually established the cars and the engines such that corn growers could produce their own biodiesel and run the cars with that. So the cars were able to run on biodiesel already 100 years ago. So it just shows a mindset. And I think that mindset is valid even today. It is the mindset of a successful company. So in that sense, when you come with your Edelman survey, I think it is really interesting to see that. But I would definitely add that it's not only the companies. You really need the governments, you need the companies, you need the customers, you need society. One alone will never be able to get where we want to get. And in that sense, if we look at it from the climate lens, and I want to come back to Kara on that, thank you very much for crystallizing it. That chart, effectively, when people say, we don't really believe we're going to meet the 2 degrees target, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about it. To the contrary, we are emphasizing the urgency. And I think that really is what we need to do. And we need to do it all together, because what's the use if a company comes up with a product? Let me give you an example. I wanted to buy a hydrogen-powered car. The company has produced it, did all the R&D, put it on the market. You can buy it. Yes, I have my solar roof. Yes, I have my heat pump. And I wanted to have the car emission-free, but I couldn't buy it. So customer was there, company was there. Why? Because the regulator hadn't approved any hydrogen station anywhere in my vicinity. So, okay, I ended up having the electric one. But you see, it's not enough to have one player corporates, one player customers, or one player governments. You really need all of them. And only then you can go to where you want to go. So the whole society has to go with it. And I think that's really the big message.
And I think I'm going to turn to Jean-Philippe, because the whole of society moving means that when we speak about ESG, are they in the right order? Shouldn't we speak about G before we speak about the E and the S, Jean-Philippe?
Good question. What is sure is that we can consider that G is a prerequisite. I'm going to explain why. The first thing is that a good governance is not a guarantee of performance, but a poor governance is a guarantee of poor performance. That's point number one. The point number two is that it's difficult in the long term to be performance in the E and the S if you don't have the right level with the G, with the governance. So yes, we could consider that G must be at the front, having in mind that governance is important in all sectors, in all companies, but there are some sectors where it is at the front of the front, especially when we think about trust. And that's the case with the finance industry. I mean, that's an example where governance is important everywhere, but especially in our industry.
Leila, taking that G a little bit further, what is needed in the G? Jean-Philippe has mentioned some of the issues, but I wanted to take it a little bit further. So we have G, we might make it as a framework in order to effect changes for the E and the S. What is really essential, and what do all the various stakeholders need to take into account within this G part?
I think that we have a big challenge with the G, with the governance. Yesterday I worked with our taxes department, and they were so worried because they don't know exactly what to include in this G. So they have made so good development of environment. They are trying with the social, but they don't know exactly what to include with the G. I think I agree that the G, it is quite important. It is homogeneous in different organizations, in different sectors. But of course, we are speaking about governance. It is quite different comparing. It is that we are in different levels when we are speaking about the governance. It is the form in which we decide things, in forms that we make everything is working. So it is not about the purpose. It is not about the performance. It is just that it is in all of the decisions that we have in our companies. So because of that, when we arrive to the governance point of view, we need to get a good information. We need to try to be collaborative. We could co-create together inside the company, outside the company, with institution and with university as well. So I think that we have there a big challenge with the G, because nowadays we need to push that G as well. And of course, I agree that maybe it is in a different level comparing with E and G and S.
Thank you, Leire. And I think as we talk, you know, the challenge becomes bigger and bigger. And dare I say, we come back to that elephant in the room, which is externalities. So is carbon pricing a mirage? We do need to walk that talk. And again, coming back to COP26, that seems to be some of the criticism on COP26, that there was a lot of talking the talk, but that who is going to walk it? I'd love Cara to come in on this first, if you wouldn't mind.
I think carbon pricing is essential. In fact, it's one of the most essential elements in climate change mitigation. And I think COP26 made some progress. At least they mentioned it. They said they were going to have a carbon market. On the one hand, corporations cannot complain about carbon tax or carbon pricing because they all want to pursue market-driven solutions. And I think carbon pricing is a market-based instrument. So there you have it, you're going to price in carbon. But you cannot have a carbon market just develop out of, you know, ex nihilo, out of nothing. You do have to have governments, and you do have to have governmental cooperation across the world to have a global carbon market. I'm not sure you can have a carbon market in each country. That would be difficult right now. Of course, there's a nascent carbon market in China, but it's very limited. And there's a carbon market in the EU, of course, but not so much in the US, which is, of course, a big market and which requires it. But I think we are headed in the right direction. We are acknowledging the importance of carbon pricing, and we are moving towards it. Okay, but as Hakan says, not quite fast enough because time is not on our side.
Time is not on our side, but the EIB is moving fast forward, it seems. Hakan, can you highlight some of the issues and how you've been addressing the issue of externalities within the EIB?
Well, thank you, Yasina. Externalities are the elephant in the room because, yeah, fully agree with what you're saying, as Cara has put it. We are in a market economy, right? And when we emit, talking of climate in this case, we don't emit for the fun of it. I mean, if somebody drives a car to earn their living, they don't really care whether they're emitting or not. They're just trying to get some clients from A to B and make a living on a day-to-day basis. And if airline companies run planes or industry produces something, they're not emitting for the sake of it. They're always emitting for some other reason, to produce a product, to deliver a service. But they're not paying for the emission themselves. It's not part of the market, but we are paying for it as a society and over the entire world globally. So we're suffering the consequences for something others have not paid. And thus the question always comes in, well, what if we were to pay? And we have some markets, they are not global, and they are not covering nearly close to what they should be covering in terms of global emissions. So what we do is we say, as an institution, as the European Investment Bank, when we make an investment decision, we say, what if we were to pay? Would this still be a viable investment? If we have got an investment case on a pure market-based term, so it's bankable, that's not good enough. It's just necessary, but not sufficient. To be sufficient, it also has to be viable based on all the economic externalities. And this includes carbon, but this includes also people, health benefits, time, savings, you name it. We try to capture everything. And of course, carbon is a big one. So we take carbon and we say, what if we were to pay for it? Were this investment still a viable one? And then you come to the next question. Well, if you were to pay it, how much would you be paying for it? So we have developed a carbon price, and I think this is a price which is quite high. Namely, we are saying carbon emitted today is bad, carbon emitted tomorrow is worse. So today we put a price on it. We literally do that. We put a price of 80 euros per ton. And this one goes up continually to 2050 to 800 euros, which is outrageously prohibitive. So you should not emit, basically, right? If you do it, it has to be very small, very limited. Otherwise, your project immediately gets non-feasible from an externality point of view. And we say, no, we cannot finance it, no matter how viable it is on a pure cash basis. It can be bankable, fine, that's of course necessary, but not sufficient. You also have to be economically viable when you take in the externalities, including the carbon pricing. It's a lot of work. It doubles the amount of work we have to do for the investments, but that's what we say, because otherwise there's no point in going forward. It has to be future-proof.
And I think it's important what you just said about that there is a lot of work involved in this type of analysis. And when you look at the new the new reality. Jean-Philippe, you mentioned that it's 30 years ago people started talking about sustainability. In those 30 years, has in practice, have we seen a shift from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism? And should we push this forward?
Yes, I would like to say that we've done great progress, and one interesting move is the EU is now encouraging the concept of double materiality. What does it mean? It means, of course, and we are in the process, we as investors, including how environmental, social, and governance factors are impacting the risk and volatility associated to our investment. That's the traditional financial materiality. But the second materiality is the question of externalities. It means you as investors have also to measure how the corporates you are invested in, and even also sovereign debt, so governments, are impacting the society, as it has been said, the climate, and so on. So that's an interesting move, and it's quite new. We have better methodologies and better data to progress, especially regarding climate change. And when we look at COP26, we have a complex puzzle when we see the results. And we have some news which shows that the glass is half full. We have an agreement, a lot of engagement regarding fossil energies, issues such as methane and so on. And then there are some points where we are disappointed, all what has been announced regarding forestry, automotive industry, and so on. And as it has been said, as an investor, there is an elephant in the room, the facts, and it was already the case in Paris in 2015, and still today, we don't have a global carbon price, which will be very useful. So I think for climate change, one of the next step we will have will be there in terms of regulation. In the meantime, a lot of investors, and that's our case, but also corporates, they put an internal price to measure the externalities of their investment. They look at alignment and so on. So we are progressing. The question is a question of urgency, accelerating. And one, I would like to conclude by that point. The good news is that historically, we had to revise, countries every 5 years, their objectives. Now, it has been decided in Glasgow that it will be every year. So now we already start discussing how can we do better, and the rendezvous will be end of 2022 and not end of 2026. That's a good piece of information and piece of news.
Thank you very much, Jean-Philippe. And as we have unrolled all these different ambitions and necessities we need to do in order to save the world, Leire, financial education. Of course, financial education for the finance industry, for companies, for retail investors, for stakeholders. Everybody needs to be educated. This is something we picked up at CFA Institute in our Future of Sustainability. Education is crucial. because even within, for example, the rollout of the recent EU legislation, the finance industry has rolled away, let's say, with this new legislation, and has almost taken to it in a way which is not really meant to be. So even within our own industry, where we know and we have been discussing it, as Jean-Philippe said, for years, we still need to educate ourselves. So the retail investor who might help to push companies into doing and walking that talk, and help and saying to finance, you know, we need to do something. We see, of course, you know, the younger generation followers of Greta up in arms, but, you know, without education, we can't get there. Leire, how can we deal with this?
Of course, we have a very important responsibility with the good education. I trust the young people, I trust children. I think that when they arrive to the higher education, to the university, it's a bit late. When I ask to my students, what is the purpose of the company, they answer that it is making money. I try to explain, I try to encourage, and maybe from this 70%, they reduce to 50%, but others, they are also all of the time trying to focus on making money. So because of that, we have a big challenge, because the purpose of the company is not only about making money, and the main purpose, it is social, because we develop this system based on the companies, because we trust companies, and because we are part of that companies, and those companies could change. So when we are speaking about education, I think that we need to start from the beginning of education. So we need to go to children, and we need to try to encourage them, because maybe they are playing with games and they have a small shop and they are saying things, and why they selling, because of the making money only, or also because other different reasons. So I think that it is the moment in which we could include and integrate ethics, trust, well-doing, and whatever. Also, I think that it is quite important, the education along all of the life. So we are on this part in which we could re-educate, and we could try to review all of the theories that all the previous people have explained to us. And sometimes we have there in our mind, but we need to change them. It is a bit important. It is sometimes quite complicated, because we have created that knowledge based on shareholders, on economic, and nowadays we have changed. So we know that it is important, that it is different, but sometimes also we have explaining that one, this one came to our arguments, and because of that we create some conflict when we are speaking. So it is not only about education from the beginning, that it is, but also because we need to re-educate ourselves.
And of course, this is a challenge for supervisors and regulators. We have seen some of the European regulators and supervisors using behavioral science as a new way to supervise. Greenwashing is being cited in the press. So on business contact, Hakan, what is this a good way to go about it? Are we being innovative? And what other suggestions can we have on really looking at the way the industry is functioning in a different way than just the straight supervision we've used to see? So can behavioral science help, in a word?
Well, behavioral science requires that there's a behavior, and we always have been behaving or not with or without the science that went with it. So this brings us back to our fundamental question of ethics and the values we have to reflect in our day-to-day lives, isn't it? So at the end of the day, yes, regulation is important, but regulation is not the answer in my view. And that's why we're working so strongly on issues of making it measurable, because without measurement, no management within the company or for the others who look into companies. That's why we're working on taxonomy, to make a clear definition which is comparable, which people can rely on. And we are working on the CSRD, which Jean-Philippe has also mentioned, with the double materiality, bringing in transparency, because only if you know, you can act, and only if you are transparent, you're accountable, and it brings trust with it as well. So this whole ecosystem of stakeholders, investors, you name it, interacting is also based on the amount of information which is out there, its reliability, its comparability. So I think in the EU, we're making very good progress on this one. I'm quite proud of that personally. And at the end of it, it will have behavioral change, because that information out there would enable people to make decisions, and decisions are, that's what behavior is about. You make decisions. And I'm very positive that we're on the right track on that.
Cara, has COVID-19 changed the way regulation is working? And I will cite you one aspect we looked at in our global COVID survey at CFA Institute, where we saw that actually the financial industry for the first time wants to work as partner with the regulator. Whereas before, of course, from the financial crisis, regulation was seen as an imposition and a control mechanism. Now, there seems to be a partnership. Have you seen this shift, and what other things have you observed?
It's very interesting that people used to, separate the public from the private. But we saw that during the pandemic, you can have public-private partnerships which work successfully, because you only have to look at the vaccine rollout. The government paid the $1 billion, the private sector used all the knowledge it had, and together they produced a vaccine. The distribution was a public-private venture. So I definitely think that this is going to be the way of the future. In terms of sustainability, I think that we have seen some private public cooperation, especially as we're seeing in the EU with the sustainability rollout on how to measure, as Hakan was saying. We have measurements, and the private sector has been asking for this because they don't want to be accused of greenwashing. They do want to measure. So the regulation, but the imposition of measurement criteria, the use of it by the private sector is a very good example of a successful so far of private-public interaction to come to something which works for the public.
Thank you very much. And I see Mairead McGuinness has joined us. Welcome, Mairead. So lovely to have you with us. And you come in bang at the right time as we discuss government and public and private partnerships. I see that we have almost come to the end of our panel. It's been a real pleasure discussing with you. It's, as always, it's too short. But I hope that for the audience, we've highlighted some of the issues that the panelists have been working with in their fields. And it really has been a great pleasure. I want to leave this panel and then go on to the keynote with a quote, which I have found very useful when thinking about this topic. And that is the following: without ethics, man has no future. This is to say, mankind without them cannot be itself. Ethics determines choices and actions and suggests difficult priorities. So when we listen to that, it seems to be that we do need ethics in sustainability. We have difficult choices and we have to follow them through. Thank you very much, panelists. If you wouldn't mind turning off your cameras, and I will then now turn to Commissioner Mairead McGuinness. Mairead, I want you on. The other one's off. It is a real pleasure to have you with us, and I know you're incredibly busy, so it really is, we appreciate it enormously. Also, we know that we changed the time and you have been extremely flexible to be with these young laureates that are going to be awarded the prize. Mairead, you have been, of course, and you are the European Commissioner for Financial Services, Financial Stability and Capital Markets Union, a big and enormous field to handle for the EU. Your vision for the portfolio is really focusing on the financial sector's strength and stability so that it can deliver for society, the people and the environment. And that is actually really to the point of this discussion. Before joining the Commission in October 2020, you were also for a long time in the Parliament and always fighting for the investors, for retail investors, for clarity and for transparency. And I think that is something that has always struck me when I've looked at the files you managed and also chairing a temporary committee on the equitable life. And again, I think that is highly significant. And I know you're personally really concerned also with the finance industry, with diversity and inclusion, and making sure that the finance industry serves its purpose, which is for the good of society and the good of the economy. So I'm going to give you the floor, and then we'll go after you. We'll go on with the awarding of the prize. The floor is yours, Mairead.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this evening's event, because as far as I'm concerned, what you're doing is pivotal to the work that I do. So very happy not just to speak, but to listen in to the award winners. And I promise the award winners were probably wondering who's winning, that I won't speak for too long, or if I do, let me know, because it's also an evening of excitement for those who have written really strong papers on this particular point of ethics and the financial sector. And just to say that our scoreboard, if you like, which the Commission does regularly to try and get a feel of how citizens perceive different sectors. If we look at the latest scoreboard from 2018, you know, the sector we're talking about, the financial sector, is at the very bottom of the list, because when it comes to trust, the banking sector really is at that very low point. And I think that reflects our own sense of citizens and consumers, that trust in our financial sector, which took a very big hit during the global financial crisis, remains difficult. And it is something that was fueled by a belief that greed and dishonesty led to the financial collapse, and that taxpayers had to pay the price with huge bailouts of banks. And again, this led to deep distrust of the sector. And I think that belief that bad behavior in the financial world was widespread has tarnished the image of the financial world, and it is taking time for trust to be restored. So I think the lesson is that if trust is broken, it's not easily restored, and that has consequences. Of course, tonight's event, which is looking at this theme of ethics and trust in finance, and I think, you know, this prize is important. You've been around for some time talking about the importance of ethics and trust, and there's a compelling narrative behind this evening's event, basically that more ethical finance can help rebuild trust in the sector. And in my view, this is absolutely essential, because even though a lot of years have passed since the worst effects of the financial crisis, deep distrust lingers. But first of all, to congratulate the 12 nominees tonight. Your papers highlight some of the ways in which more ethical finance can build trust. And the topics are really varied, from access to finance and fair lending, sustainable investing, which is a big topic, and of course the approach to new technologies like cryptocurrency and what that means for the whole financial system and indeed for trust. As you've said, and thank you for reminding those who are listening this evening, you know, building a financial system that serves people who use it is a priority for me as Commissioner for Financial Services, because as well as being a commissioner, remember, I'm also a citizen and a user of financial services. And now I'm entrusted with the job of managing this sector. And therefore, trust in this sector is very important to me, because it's important that people can trust their banks and the financial services system more widely. And it is important not just for people, but I think it's really important for the financial system itself that people have trust in it. And I think in our everyday lives, we know that trust is the very basis of all good and stable relationships. So in terms of a more ethical financial industry, I want to make 3 points. First, finance as an industry should be more representative of the people that use its services. Second point, financial services should be accessible to those that need them. And third, a secure and resilient financial system can help drive the change we need in society and the economy as we work to becoming more sustainable. So there are three topics that are very close to my heart: gender diversity, financial inclusion in the digital age, and finance that works for both environment and society. So let me kick off with this topic of gender diversity in finance, and maybe throw back to my own career, if you like, which began many years ago. And, in my youth, I thought that the issue of equality, the representation of women, would improve of itself, that there would be a natural evolution towards a more balanced society and more balanced sectors. And I really did believe that until I reflected on the truth that, of course, change doesn't always happen generically. Sometimes you do need positive action to drive that change. And that's something that I now believe is important. And it certainly has been my life experience. And to give you a background, I worked in journalism in a number of areas that were heavily dominated by male colleagues: agriculture, journalism generally, politics, and now financial services, where, to my surprise, I'm sometimes the only woman in the room, or indeed on the Zoom call. Now, there are a lot of women employed in the financial sector because women make up over 50%. So 53% of the workforce in the top 15 EU banks are women. But of course, women are not present enough at senior levels, at management and leadership levels. And if you look to reports, Oliver Wyman would report that women make up only 20% on executive committees and 23% on boards in finance. And the leadership, I believe, of financial institutions needs to be more diverse because, first of all, it is the right thing to do, but equally, more diverse teams are also more resilient, and it can help companies better meet their customers' needs and expectations. And here are some interesting figures. 40% of total global wealth is now held by women. 40% of entrepreneurs are women, and 2/3 of household spending is controlled by women. So it makes good business sense to commit to gender diversity. A more diverse workforce, and particularly more diverse leadership, will be better placed to serve those consumers that I referred to. And financial services really must do more to support women who want to pursue senior leadership positions and diversity. It needs to be part of the culture of companies. And just to say, I was speaking to some leaders in the financial world who said they do want to make progress and have more women in leadership, but they find perhaps a reluctance on the side of women to put themselves forward. And that's something we need to look at as well. How do we enable women who are capable and who have enough faith and belief in themselves that they go forward for these leadership positions? It is something that I'm conscious we need to address. If you look at the wider policy area, I'm happy to say we have women in prominent roles, not many, but we do have some. So for example, when there are meetings of the EU economics and finance ministers, us women who attend, we make sure to have a photo together. And so alongside myself, there's Christine Lagarde, the first female president of the ECB. There's Irene Tingali, chair of the European Parliament's Economic Affairs Committee. And we're joined by female finance ministers. Currently, we have 6 out of a total of 27. So that picture, is not a huge group, but it is a significant group of women in finance. And we take that picture to highlight our, I suppose, unity, but also to highlight the need for more change and to have more balance, where it won't be unusual to have women taking this photograph, that it will be balanced for the future. But for now, it's not. And I think it's a good idea to at least visualize the reality. If we look towards financial inclusion, the point that the financial sector and policymakers should better reflect the people it serves is a really, really important point. And I think it should also, maybe this is the second point this evening, we have to make sure that the system and the sector serves everyone and that it does so in a fair way. I want to come back to my hearing before the European Parliament, and I mentioned in particular the late John Hume MEP. Some of you may know, I hope you do, he was a very great Irishman and a great European. And John Hume is renowned rightly and is revered for building peace in Northern Ireland. But at the very start of his political career, he was driven by a passion to achieve financial inclusion in the community he represented. And that community, the people he served in his home city of Derry, were very much discriminated against. Many were unemployed. Many families lived in poverty, and many did not have access to bank accounts or indeed to loans. So John Hume saw the need, and he helped set up Derry Credit Union to provide access to finance for his community that up to now had been outside of the financial system. And the good news is that at the European level, we've made sure that today everyone has access by right to a basic bank account in recognition of the importance of access to financial services. And it was in 2014 that the European Union adopted the Payment Accounts Directive, and this ensures that EU residents are entitled to open a payments account. And very importantly, this includes asylum seekers and people with no fixed address. Today, the financial system is changing dramatically because of technology. I think we all know that. We see this change before our very eyes. And this has an impact on financial inclusion. Today, people can choose online accounts, and that can, these can be easier to open, and they can be cheaper, and indeed some are free. Investing money in capital markets is easier and quicker than ever before. At the same time, look at what's happening in the physical world. Banks are closing more and more branches, and this trend has also accelerated during the pandemic. This makes it harder for people, especially those who are less comfortable with technology, to actually access services and even to get hold of cash. Now, cash is still king, both in terms of volume and value of transactions. And I think that really as policymakers and the industry, we should work to maintain access to cash. In the retail payment strategy, the Commission recalled that it expects our governments in the European Union to ensure the acceptance and accessibility of cash as a public good remains a reality, because it's vital for financial inclusion and for consumer choice. But we also need to give people the skills and knowledge they need to take the decisions that are right for them. So to have the confidence, to have the capacity to ask the right questions. And I think that also means having digital skills, given that this is of growing importance and that technology will be more and more part of our everyday lives. I think lots of you will know that financial literacy is something that I'm very passionate about. It is a priority. I want us to be able to talk about money and to be confident to ask questions when buying financial products. It's true that the level of financial knowledge across the member states, between countries and indeed within countries, varies significantly. And the most vulnerable groups are disproportionately affected when it comes to not having this knowledge around the financial system. So we're working to address this, not just ourselves, but we're working with the OECD and its international network on financial education to develop what we're calling a joint financial competence framework. And it's about creating standards that are commonly used and recognized across the European Union. And we'll make this framework available to governments and county councils, to charities, educational organizations, businesses, and banks and the financial system. And we want it to be used to develop policies and tools to improve financial literacy. Regulators and supervisors are adapting to this changing world. And if you look at cash being less accessible and the digital money that exists in private, then perhaps, we could be talking about a role for central bank digital currencies. So we're moving from cash, yet we want it to be king. We're also looking towards a future where central banks are looking at developing digital currencies, these so-called CBDCs. And here in Europe, the ECB has launched an investigation phase into the digital euro. Other countries are looking at this. The latest globally is Nigeria, but many countries are looking at developing this digital central bank currency. And as I've said, we're looking at it with the ECB. We're looking at how this might be developed, what shape, what model it might take. And if you look at what it might offer, so a digital euro could give consumers more choice. It would be good perhaps for financial inclusion by bringing people who don't have access to a bank account into the financial system. But of course, there are lots of questions. For example, how would we keep a digital euro secure? What impact would it have on our traditional banks today? How would we maintain the privacy of those who are using a digital euro? And of course, this is a very big decision if we take the ultimate decision to have a digital euro, and it is one we would need to get absolutely right. So finally, I want to speak about helping the financial system serve the wider society. And I think this is the topic of the day, if you like. Regulators have done a lot of work to fix past mistakes in the financial system, which were demonstrated during the financial crisis. This unethical behavior that resulted in the crisis, which had a huge impact on people's lives and livelihoods. And the result of our work is that banks are better capitalized. They have enough liquidity and they're not excessively leveraged. We also are looking to complete, if you like, the reform. So we have this banking package. We're looking at the final part of implementing Basel III. These have been agreed at international level. Now we need to put them into effect. And I hope and believe that these final fixes, if you like, will contribute to more trust in finance. And that's the whole essence of the reform package, you know, to fix past mistakes. Then looking to the future, finance can do a great deal to contribute to the wider ambitions and needs in our society. And we need it to be trusted in order for it to play its full part. Financial services have a key role to play when it comes to tackling climate change. And I think we all know that money will matter when it comes to making these big changes. We need money to flow towards what is sustainable. We need to address the issues that are important, that impact on our environment and society. In July this year, we had our new sustainable finance strategy, stepping up our efforts to make the financial system contribute more towards our climate goals. Because to finance the transition of our economy, companies must be able to give very clear signals to investors on the steps they're taking to reduce their environmental impact. You know, we have developed the EU taxonomy. It defines economic activities that are environmentally sustainable. We're also proposing the EU Green Bond Standard based on the taxonomy. And again, this will help companies raise large-scale finance for environmentally friendly projects. And by setting a gold standard in the green bond market, it will help tackle greenwashing. And I know this is a topic you've already been discussing. One of the key things we need to do is to bring people with us on the way to climate neutrality and to keep people with us on this journey. To make sustainable finance more inclusive, we want to include small businesses and citizens. So we will support the idea of green loans and green bonds and really try and address these particular issues. Now, I know that time is running short, but I wanted you to have a flavor of what we're doing around this whole societal and global ambition to tackle climate change. And remember, it's also a risk to financial stability if we don't address climate change. So the financial system itself could be damaged by it. So briefly, you've heard of my view, you've heard of the things that I'm passionate about, but I'm more interested now in listening to the names of the award winners, the prize winners tonight, to congratulate all of you. And maybe when I listen, I might respond because you hopefully will give me some ideas to help me in my work here. But most of all, a big thank you for allowing me to be part of tonight's big award ceremony. Good luck. And thank you to all of those who actually put forward really impressive papers and are part of tonight's big event. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing the names being drum rolled.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your presence, your enthusiasm, sharing your worries, your experience, but also avenues for future action. I think many of the themes has been touched upon by authors of the present edition. And I think that you open a catalog of issues that could be tackled in the future edition of our prize. So I think that I'm speaking in the name of the young generation that is present here. Thank you for his inspirational talk and showing avenues how finance, financial system, financial professionals can serve what we call in the Observatoire the common good. As you mentioned, we will be happy to have some of your additional remarks after the mystery is lifted of the identity of the winners. So let's then now turn to the winners of this edition. As you know, the jury has had a very difficult job when confronted with a list of 12 nominated papers. And these papers have been addressing a wide area of subjects, but there are three groups. One group about sustainability, one group about the moral, always open question of debt relationships at different levels, at very micro and very macro level. And of course, some papers addressing broadly understood institutional issues, both at very macro level and very micro level. So the jury works in total anonymity. So we don't know until the prizes have been allocated to papers, we don't know the identity of the winners. So therefore, we are not responsible for the gender balance. We are not responsible for the geographical balance. What I can tell you that we have had expressions of interest from about 90 countries in the world and incoming papers from 25 countries. So let's now turn to the winners. And there is a slide showing the winners, and I think he's coming up. So we have 5 faces, but we don't have the names and we don't have the ranks for the moment. So we prize all of them. It's coming. It should be coming. Yes, so we have 5 faces. We have 5 winners, but we don't know the ranks. We don't know the names. Now let's progress. Starting from the 3rd ex aequo prize, which goes to Kelly Ann Hamrick for her paper, Shades of Green, Ethics in Net Zero Financial Transition. Kelly is working in the United States. She is a policy advisor in Nature Conservancy, which is, I guess, an NGO. So congratulations, Kelly. You will receive a check of $2,000. We are happy to be able to give it to you, and congratulations for your paper. Now you have a few minutes to share with us, your concerns, possibly your projects, and your vision for the future. Thank you very much. Kelly, the world is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. The topic of sustainable finance is incredibly timely. I just came from tracking the climate finance and carbon markets negotiations at COP26, which concluded last week. And one thing that really struck me was that some of the biggest announcements came from companies and investors. And this included the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which represents over 450 financial institutions with a combined $130 trillion in private capital. And these signatories have pledged to become net zero by 2050. So this is a critical first step to accounting for the financial sector's climate impact, but I must emphasize that it is the first step. Trust must begin with transparency, but then must be followed by commensurate action. And what does this mean for the finance sector? It means that financial institutions must look beyond their direct emissions to the emissions of the companies that they fund. As lenders and investors, they must demand that these companies set their own targets and report on their own progress. Additionally, when considering how to meet their net zero targets, financial institutions must bring an ethical approach towards decision-making. A case in point that I wanted to highlight: when the countries of Ecuador and France tried to remove fossil fuel subsidies, there were mass protests in the streets that ultimately led to a repeal of these initiatives. And this is an incredibly important lesson from public finance to private finance. At the heart of the trillions of dollars invested in trading across the global economy are people. And the poorest and most vulnerable will be impacted the most by climate change, but ironically, they are also the ones most immediately impacted by the transition away from our current system based on fossil fuels. So any financing of this transition, whether it be divesting from fossil fuels or investing in low carbon solutions, must also consider how to minimize these social impacts or it will fail. And while there are a growing number of frameworks and resources for financial institutions to set climate targets and to credibly track progress in meeting their goals, some of the most critical human and ethical dimensions can never be distilled into a simple metric or found on a balance sheet. So to combat climate change, we are racing against the clock to completely re-envision our current economic system, and we cannot do it without ethics at the heart of this approach. Thank you so much again. And I hope if you're interested, you can read my full essay, which I hope will be online. Thank you so much.
And welcome to the alumni lab I will be mentioning in a few minutes. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for your commitment, not only in writing, but also in action, which is very, very important. So there is a second ex-equo third prize that goes to Andrea Longton for her essay, and the slides should be coming up, for her essay about asymmetrical access to capital, why ethics matters. It's a different field of ethics. It's not sustainability. And Andrea, you have a few minutes to share with us your analysis, but also maybe your concerns or your projects for the future. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this incredible honor. I want to thank my husband, Kyle, on whose support I lean every day, and my three precious children, Cora, Lucy, and George. So thank you very much. I want to introduce this story through my roots. I am from Kentucky in the United States, and I know I'm speaking to a global audience. And Kentucky is known for its fried chicken, horse racing, and love of basketball. So I'm going to introduce this story through basketball, because it is often a story that is told through personal experiences rather than data. Growing up, I was really tall, which is great for basketball, but I've never been characterized as a fast runner, which is not great for basketball. And I had a coach who instructed me and another teammate to stand under the hoop with our hands up to block the opposing team from scoring goals. So they had very limited pathways to score, whereas my team was able to run down the court unimpeded to score points and win the game. And so this asymmetrical access to the basketball goal, the means by which to accumulate points, is similar to the asymmetrical access of capital in the United States, where Black and Brown and low wealth communities have few pathways to capital. This paper, in fact, starts with raising critical research that in the United States, something other than the underlying credit of Black and Brown communities blocks them from accessing capital. And so the premise of this paper was why? How did this happen? Is this legal? How is this ethical? And the paper resolves it in part by pointing out a persistent gap between legal compliance in the US financial system, and I'm talking specifically around banking and lending practices. So a persistent gap between legal compliance and the higher ethical standards that we as financial professionals are called to uphold. That, in other words, just because something is legal does not make it ethical. Or as my parents taught me, just because something is something you can do doesn't mean that you should do it. And so you shouldn't have to be Michael Jordan to get an affordable loan, where white families are able to run up the court and score easy layups where you just toss the ball into the net. Black and Brown families have to weave through a full court press before they get to encounter two tree-like giants at the end of the court. So again, you shouldn't have to be Michael Jordan to get an affordable loan, but there is hope. This paper moves on to outline how a network of US community lenders certified as Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, are able to successfully drive capital to Black and Brown, rural and Indigenous, and low wealth communities in the United States. And as it turns out, they're successful by adapting tried and true banking practices to the very communities that have been boxed out for far too long from mainstream finance. Finally, this paper proposes discussion guideposts for any financial institution considering how to restore an ethical financial system, one in which no one is left out. As a spoiler, those three guideposts are accountability through transparency, leadership, and key performance indicators. I'm really grateful to the mentors and leaders who instilled in me a core truth that an ethical financial system is one in which no one is left out. After all, finance should be for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea, for your sharing so forcefully your ideas and your commitment. And I think you bring the analysis to a very important point. Legal does not always mean ethical. even in the countries where you have a free economy, a free society, it is not always enough to be only legal. And I think it's at the micro level, at the macro level, at the corporation level, it needs to be reminded, and that's the reason why ethics matters. So all the papers of the nominated papers will be published in a few days on the website, and the booklet will be out also shortly. Let's move to the second prize. We have also two ex aequo second prizes. The first of them goes to Martin Lockman. And you see that the geographical balance is not very much respected well all the time in the United States. But I told you the jury is not responsible for balance, either geographical or gender. Martin has been writing about lenders as monitors of risk devolution. And I leave you the floor, and I just signal that you will receive a check of $4,000 as the second ex aequo prize. Martin, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Professor Dembinski. One of the great pleasures of receiving an award is that you have the opportunity to publicly thank colleagues, and you also have the opportunity to bore an audience with anecdotes that didn't make it into the final version of your paper. I'm planning to do both. But first, I'd like to briefly summarize my paper, which I believe highlights an important issue. The rise of the global gig economy has resulted in a massive devolution of risks from equity to employees. The ethical issue is simple. During good times, the distribution of risk can be invisible to ordinary people, and sophisticated companies get away with shifting quite a lot of risk to small contractors. When a crisis emerges, these people go bankrupt or they go hungry. I argue that lenders are well positioned to monitor this risk shifting because employment contracts are fundamentally assets of the borrower. Lenders have a vested interest in ensuring that the cost of truly unanticipated events, like the COVID-19 pandemic, are absorbed by equity rather than eroding the underlying asset base. My paper goes on to identify contractual mechanisms that can protect both lenders and employees from risk shifting. This paper was written in the winter of 2020, and I believe that my argument has since been broadly vindicated by the markets. Companies built on models that treat employees as easily replaceable at the height of the pandemic are struggling to attract and keep workers, while companies with strong labor practices are not. However, this paper and this competition highlight the fact that ethics in finance must go far beyond self-interested interventions. A brief story from my practice as a finance attorney illustrates this need. A few years ago, I was on a call negotiating the financing of a small industrial facility in the United States. We were reading through the very standard contract and came to one sentence. In the event of a serious malfunction, the operator must immediately inform the administrative agent. One of the borrowers on the call, a man who would actually be on site operating this facility, was outraged. If any malfunction happens, he said, I'm going to evacuate the area, call emergency services, and make sure my men are safe. I'm not going to call the lenders. You can leave the language in if you want, but I'm going to breach it if I need to. Of course, everyone quickly agreed that the language should be changed to make it absolutely clear that immediately didn't actually mean immediately. The company could obviously take emergency safety measures without worrying about their debtors. The problem was solved. This story could easily be told in this example of how wonderful finance is, how wonderful ESG is. Oh, we took the public interest into account. Look how enlightened we are. Instead, I believe that this story shows the accidental power of finance and the importance of the work of L'Observatoire and its partners. No court in the world would foreclose just because the borrower called an ambulance before they called their lender. However, the existence of a rule, any rule, can massively shape the moral intuitions of decision makers. The drafting of a debt contract represents an ethical structuring moment for the debtor. Debt limits the scope of future behavior and reorders the incentives of management. At the same time, debt creates new rules and institutions that shape ethical intuitions of decision makers. For this reason, we must consider the ethical implications of finance, not just in the economics of any transaction, but in its implementation and legal structuring. I would like to thank L'Observatoire, the panelists, the jury, Commissioner McGuinness, and my friends and colleagues on this call for their truly, truly critical work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for once again presenting your views, but also showing that risk devolution is a moving target. And the structuring of risk is never fixed because it depends very much on how the situation evolves. And this, one of my friends and teachers who used to say ethics is about sharing and distributing the risk. And your paper is a very good illustration of this. Thank you very much, and welcome to the Alumni Lab, where all the nominees of the previous editions gather time to time for discussion, for production of papers, from production of videos. You will be updated about it in a few minutes by Virgile Perret. So let's turn to the second ex aequo prize, which goes to Mrs. Alina Mika. She is working in the UK, but she's the native from Poland, and her paper is about ethics of sustainable investment. So Alina, the check for $4,000 is awaiting you. Congratulations, warm congratulations for getting to this competition and to being on the top of the pile. Alina, the world is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the award. It's been such an honor listening to the distinguished panelists and the other winners. Much of what my essay covered fits quite well within the discussion of the ethics of sustainable finance covered during the panel earlier. In my essay, I focus on sustainable investing in particular. Consider sustainable investing as a spectrum of strategies. On one end, we have strategies closely resembling traditional investing, where the primary objective are financial returns. On the other end, we have strategies closer to philanthropy, where the objective is making an impact in a specific area. Based on data from the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance, in 2020, roughly 2/3 of sustainable investments globally stemmed from only 2 strategies. And perhaps unsurprisingly, both of these strategies are quite close to the traditional investing end of the spectrum. I will briefly introduce the strategies now. So the first strategy is negative screening. Here, an investor chooses to avoid specific sectors or activities, for example, tobacco or fossil fuels. And this strategy, by definition, focuses on avoiding doing harm, as opposed to actively creating good outcomes. The second strategy is ESG integration, and this is actually the most popular sustainable investment strategy globally. An ESG integration is the practice of including ESG information and data together with financial data when making investment decisions. And based on commonly accepted definitions, the objective of ESG integration is the search for financial returns. And this comes on the back of research, and quite a bit of research, that the relationship between ESG performance and long-term financial outcomes is likely non-negative or maybe even positive. Hence, again, creating the most impact is not the stated intention here. In my essay, I argued for the importance of a consequentialist mindset among sustainable investors who seek to use sustainable finance as a way to tackle the global challenges that we face. This mindset suggests that the ultimate answer to whether a given action is morally right depends on the outcome of that action. And I think in this setting, the mindset implies improving both the impact of the aforementioned investment strategies, as well as adopting strategies which actively prioritize outcomes to financial returns. And to this end, I see the need for progress in 2 crucial areas. First, good ESG data is crucial. A recent OECD study found that the average correlation between a company's ESG metrics as sourced from different data providers is very poor, only around 0.4. And this lack of consistency contrasts with almost perfect alignment in metrics of financial performance, companies' credit scores. And as an economist, I know quite well that data is never perfect, but I think this is more than just a data problem. This is quite a serious challenge to the ability of capital flows to tilt towards the most sustainable agents and products, and hence incentivizing best sustainability outcomes. And secondly, I think we need some rebalancing of the sustainable investing universe towards the impact side of the spectrum. I think this is the only way in which we can deliver sustainable change. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for the award.
Thank you very much for developing your analysis, and I think you are making a very strong point, which of course terminology time to time makes less apparent. The term investment is used both for the financial investment, the stock market investment, and the real economy investment. That what is changing the world is the real side of the investment process. The financial investment, stock market investment is the beginning of it. So I think it's very forceful to draw the attention to the real side of the investment process. The financial market investment can be the first step, but there needs to be followed by the other steps that lead to impact, to change of strategies, to change of behavior of corporations. So I think it's a very important point, and thank you for making it. So thank you, Alina. And once again, as all the previous winners, you are part of the nominees, you are part of the alumni club where you will be able to develop further these ideas. And I'm sure you don't need this club to be forceful speaker to your colleagues and other professional audiences. Let's now turn to the first prize. The first prize which is awarded to Julie Siegel, once again from North America, from Canada. And this first prize is of $8,000. And you, Julie, you wrote about justice and sustainability, the pricing in physical climate risk. Physical climate risk is very important. And I think that you are going to explain in your small talk what it is about. Thank you very much for submitting your essay, and congratulations for being this edition winner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be the winner of this prize, and congratulations to my fellow laureates, and thank you for your excellent presentations. I'll take the next few minutes to speak a bit about the contents of my paper. As you mentioned, I discuss lessons in environmental justice for sustainable finance and focus on a recent development of pricing in the physical risks of climate change. So I argue that investors should consider principles of environmental justice when pricing climate risk into decision-making for investments. Pricing in climate risk is a tenet of sustainable finance as it's developed recently. And under this approach, investors integrate climate change-related risks to determine the financial terms for an investment. So investors use this approach to mitigate their exposure to climate change. Investors may choose to exclude investments with high climate risk from their portfolio or demand a higher return as compensation. But you can see that in either case, the investment capital will be more expensive for a region or company with higher vulnerability to climate risk. And this is an important development. Investment decisions should include climate-related data. However, by pricing in the physical risks of climate change without accounting for principles of environmental justice, the regions most vulnerable to climate change are charged for a global problem. A study in 2018 confirmed that the average cost of debt for countries most vulnerable to climate change already increased by 117 basis points on average. This creates an asymmetric cost of capital. It also creates a degenerative feedback loop. If vulnerable regions can't afford to invest in adaptation, their climate risk and cost of capital only compounds. If they cannot invest in mitigation, global efforts to reduce carbon emissions are weakened. So in the absence of controlling measures, pricing in the physical risks from climate change aggravates the climate and social issues that sustainable finance aims to confront. This compromises global progress against climate change. However, sustainable finance can integrate environmental justice to bring integrity and stability to private financial markets. I evaluate a few definitions of environmental justice, using the definition that environmental justice mandates the burdens of climate change should be paid by those historically responsible and by those with the capacity to pay. Variants of this framework guide international and national climate policy. For example, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change considers the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. This principle ratifies countries' differing contributions to climate change and responsibility to deal with it. So in short, all countries are responsible for addressing climate change, but not equally so. Investors in sustainable finance can learn from how environmental justice frameworks are applied to climate policy internationally and nationally. So why should an investor care about environmental justice? Well, climate change will have a worse effect on low-income countries, but economists believe climate change will damage the economy internationally. This is evidently concerning for investors. Investors' returns are a product of the market. So investors should therefore consider this double materiality that panelists spoke to earlier, both the climate risk to their portfolio and the climate implications of investments. Pricing in climate risk only considers the risk to a portfolio. Investors should instead consider the climate impacts of their investments, mitigating risks in the market as a whole instead of trying to externalize risk. Investors can reduce risk across their portfolio by advancing climate action, redressing social inequity, therefore improving the stability of the global macroeconomy. When investors try to externalize climate risk, high costs of capital can impede investments into climate adaptation and mitigation. So pricing in climate risk, while well-intended, could obstruct climate action by aggravating geographical and historical inequities. This vitiates global cooperation against climate change and creates risks for the financial system. This is evidently a vital gap in the movement towards sustainable finance. So instead, private finance should be held accountable to the same environmental justice principles that guide other climate-related decision-making processes. I outline in my paper how to integrate environmental justice into sustainable finance through public-private partnership, regulation, voluntary action, and conclude that frameworks for environmental justice can enable equitable access to investment capital and help achieve global climate resilience. Thank you again to all of the judges for this incredible honor, and I look forward to conversing with the other laureates.
So congratulations again for the winner of this competition. And you brought the environmental justice, you expressed the question of environmental justice in terms of cost of capital. I think it's a very forceful, let's say, link, because it's very, environmental justice on one side is very abstract. The cost of capital is a everyday reality for a lot of enterprises. And addressing this in terms of externality that sustainable investors should take into account, which is a second level of externality. It's not only environment, but is also the spread, geographical spread of the environmental issues. I think you are in a very interesting subject for action, as I know you are active in this field, but also for academic and ethical research and concern. So congratulations to all. And now, if the commissioner is still there and she was waiting for your speeches, thank you, Commissioner, for being with us again. And you said that maybe you would like to come in. So please do if you feel like this.
Well, look, thank you for allowing me listen, because it's been extraordinary to listen to the ideas, the energy, and the commitment, the genuine human commitment to this topic. And can I start with Julie, because really you've triggered a lot of thought in my own head, but I know tonight we don't have a lot of time. But I think the warning that you give, that you can aggravate the situation by sustainable investing if you don't take a wider account of the region and the social consequences. I want to thank you for mentioning double materiality. I'm glad you're Canadian. I want you to spread this word, because the European Union is committed to making sure companies report not just on how the world impacts them. So what does climate impact on their bottom line, but more importantly, in my view, how does their activities impact on the wider society and climate in particular? And we don't have the rest of the world thinking like we do, but we want them to. So I think your paper might help us go in that direction. So spread the word, and I'd be very happy to work with you and have more contact on that point. If I move then in no particular order, but of course, congratulations to all of you, that is without saying anything else. Kelly, you were very much talking about people, putting people at the center, and reflecting a reality that and a concern that I share with you, that we are in danger in our transition of leaving people behind, of allowing the poorest to suffer more because of this transition. But we are conscious that that would be desperate and horrible from a moral point of view, and plain wrong. So what do we do to address this? Well, at the European level, we talk about leaving no one behind. We talk about supporting those, for example, at the moment where energy prices are high and they find themselves in energy poverty. How do you do that in a way which doesn't see us subsidizing fossil fuels, but sees us supporting the person in this transition? But I think that the whole tone of your content this evening and your paper is about making sure we have this ethical approach, and that we aren't, if you like, doing good by removing subsidies on fossil fuels, which is absolutely essential, but we're also understanding the consequences that might have for those who perhaps don't have a voice, but who would suffer. So, full marks to you to address this issue of the just transition, of taking account of the social impacts. Lastly, to say, if we don't do that, we will have social fragmentation. We will have protests in the street, and that will be justified if in our policy making and in our work around sustainable investment, we don't listen and take account of the impacts across society. So again, thank you for that. Moving to Andrea, again, congratulating everybody on this journey, and love the story of Kentucky and your 3 wonderful children and being tall, which I'm not. But I think you very clearly and very poignantly address this issue of, if you don't get access to finance, so Black and brown communities clearly don't, what it impacts, what it means for your family and society. I hope you heard my reference to John Hume, an Northern Irish politician, and I know that in America he would be well known. He saw the very same thing for his community. As it turned out, nationalist community, probably Catholic community. They were totally disadvantaged. In those times, those dark times, they were discriminated against. He saw the need for finance for those communities, and you couldn't get it anywhere. So you create the structures of credit unions, locally based. And indeed, my late father would have been involved in the credit union movement. So I really feel a great empathy to what you're saying there. So, you know, it shouldn't be that communities who are disadvantaged have to build their own structures, but I'm glad they do. But it also makes us realize the importance of finance for life, for livelihoods, for you know, because finance is about everything. And therefore, I think your paper, you know, very much deals with that in a very, very connectable way. So well done on that. And to Martin around the gig economy, which is all the buzz now. You know what's been interesting about COVID-19? I think all of our predictions about what the world would look like when we're coming out of this crisis are different than is the reality. And to say we're not fully out of this crisis, we're all worried about a 4th wave, and infection levels are certainly rising. But we're now seeing businesses, you know, really trying to find workers. So, and workers making choices about who they will work with and for. And the idea of treating people as you should, you know, like you would like to be treated yourself, is absolutely key, and should always have been key, but wasn't always the case. So I think around this whole idea, this, as you said, this wonderful ESG issue, and ethics in finance, you know, there's an awful lot to learn from what you have exposed in your paper, that lenders can be monitors of risk devolution. I hadn't quite thought about it until you very clearly articulated it. So again, congratulations and well done to you on that. And last but by no means least, Elena, and as you can see, I was scribbling lots of notes and taking careful attention to what you're saying here. I thought this was really interesting, the whole ethics of sustainable investing. So yeah, people do screen out, and this has been more the focus. So don't invest in anything that's bad or brown. You know, when you mentioned cigarettes and fossil fuels, integrating ESG, but this wider issue of the impact. So do people who are investing invest with a mindset of looking at what the impact of their decisions will actually have? Now that's taking this whole conversation to a whole new level, which actually we need to take it to, because I think if we leave it just about, you know, not investing in what's doing harm, maybe we don't then maximize the returns from investing with impact, this so-called impact investing. So I have to say, I'm glad I stayed with this, because, you know, it's one thing to read a paper, and it's always important, but it's a really other thing to listen to the passion that comes across, even on a screen, from those who are prize winners. I mean, of course, I'd love to have seen European voices here, and we've got one, but look, it's good that there's a global community. And Alana, you're that European voice. But I think in the world where we're trying to find global challenges, we're a global community. Whether you're in Canada or the US, or you're from Poland and you live in the UK, or where you're in Brussels, where my work is, and I'm from Ireland, you know, at the end of the day, none of us will escape if things go wrong with our whole financial system. and our efforts towards creating a more sustainable economy and society and a better world. I liked the idea that, you know, maybe in a way, and I'm trying to find the note I made around the note, this idea of leaving no one behind. You know, for investors who might only care about money, and I think this was Andrea's point, you know, there may be a reason why for, you know, vested self-interest, they should care about more than that. They should realize that if the world tumbles into disarray, you know, having a pot of gold to sit on will be of very little value, or indeed that pot of gold will diminish. So enlightened self-interest might also be part of this conversation. So I really wanted to listen, and I'm glad I did. And thank you for allowing me to respond. I am really in awe of your thinking, the wonderful minds you have, the young minds that are out there thinking about these things, because the financial world is perhaps not renowned for having, you know, people who think outside the box. But we have you this evening, and you've been awarded. You've won because you're worthy. And I really would urge you, whatever you do now and in the future, to continue in that vein of making us all sit up and think. And as somebody whose everyday bread and butter is about policy making and trying to do the right thing, not always easy in political systems, but really important we strive for that higher goal. You've certainly motivated me very strongly this evening as the darkness falls here in Brussels. So bravo, I was quietly applauding while you were all getting the award. So thank you so much. It's been a real honor to listen, and I really wish you well in your future careers. I think you are hugely motivating, fantastic people. Thank you.
So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. I think you could not have a better first reaction to your papers than the one you just got. And I remember when we started the journey of the Observatoire and of the prize, speaking about ethics and finance, many of our friends also in the financial industry, but not only, were saying, well, but there is a contradiction in terms. Finance and ethics cannot dance together. Your papers, your commitment have shown that it's not easy, but it's the unique way to go forward. And we have to stick to it, even if there is, of course, there are disillusions, there are disappointments, but there is also a light of hope somewhere, and we have to travel this journey. So you are young, you are committed, and the world will change, and will probably better change that our generation did with this forceful commitment. So wonderful. I told you that you are now members of the Alumni Lab, and there is a work that can be started there. But before this, please don't forget to send your banking details to our secretariat in order to be able to fulfill our promises. Finance is important. And don't forget that your papers will be published probably next week on our website, and the brochure will be out shortly. So there is a possibility to write to the Observatoire or to the prize in order to get a physical copy of the brochure. So I'm closing now this official part of the ceremony, thanking again the commissioner, the panelists, Josina Kamerling, who was my co-president of the jury, and inviting those that have been invited for a short, less formal exchange that will be moderated and animated by Virgile Perret, who is on the screen, who is the managing director of the prize. I don't know, Josina, if you want to say 2 words or one or two.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. And thank you very, very much, Mairead, because you know what's so interesting is that over the years, Christine Lagarde, Jonathan Hill, Francois Villeroy de Gallo have all been awarding this prize, and all of you have spoken with passion and been interested in these laureates. And I agree. I have enjoyed over the years to read all these essays. I go back to it from time to time. I quote all of you extensively in the years to come. And I really look forward to engaging with you in further discussion. It's been a real pleasure this time. And it's a pleasure to see so many women. Forgive me, Martin, but it's nice to see so many women. I have to say it.
It's nice to see Martin as well, okay? Martin.
Definitely.
So next rendezvous is the launch of the 9th edition that will happen somewhere in the spring if goodwill with us, if we have the support and we have your support, hopefully we have the team support, this partner support, in order to relaunch the Ethics and Trust in Finance for a Sustainable Future, 9th edition, spring 2002, with culmination in 2 years from now, in autumn 2003. So take care, all of you, and we stay in a smaller group with the jury members, with the partners, and with the speakers, and of course with the winners and nominees.